The conference room at Whitman and Cole went quiet after my brother spoke. Kevin sat at the head of the table, his chin lifted like a judge ready to pass sentence. 11 luxury beach condos in Miami, he said, combined value of around $8.4 million, since I have been managing them. They should be mine. My mother's hand landed on his shoulder with a proprietary squeeze. It is only fair, she whispered, her eyes never once drifting toward my side of the table. My father nodded. His gaze fixed on the glossy mahogany tabletop. Teagan, he said, his voice heavy with the habitual reflex of choosing my brother over me, can you understand? Kevin has always been the responsible one. Aunt Vanessa smirked from the corner, her voice dripping with that familiar Charleston condescension. What would you do with real estate anyway? You are just a consultant, you file papers, you do not build empires. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family while someone else took the credit for the very ground you built under their feet? Let me know your story down in the comments. I would love to know who else is part of this community. I did not cry, I did not ask them why they were doing this, I did not even let my heart rate speed up. Anger is a luxury for people who have not already done the math. For 5 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, and today, the subscription had finally expired. I rubbed my eyes, not to hide a tear, but to clear away the last traces of a sentimentality that no longer served me. This was not a family meeting, it was a balance sheet, and I was finally ready to reconcile the accounts. My compassion had been a resource they had overdrafted for years, but the bank was closed. I reached for my coffee cup, taking a slow, clinical sip while the air in the room thickened with their smug satisfaction. I watched Kevin lean back, his arms crossing over his chest. He looked at me as if I were a piece of office furniture he was planning to replace. He told me that there was no need for a tantrum. He said that maybe I was finally accepting reality. Reality is a funny thing. It is usually made of brick, mortar, and recorded deeds, not the stories we tell ourselves to feel powerful. I turned my eyes to my father. He is 73 now, grayer and frielier than he was when I started doing his taxes for him in secret, but his instinct to protect the golden child was as robust as ever. Dad, I said softly, the sound of my voice seemed to startle him, as if he had forgotten I was even allowed to speak. You really do not know, do you? I watched his forgotten fork slip from his fingers. It clattered against the fine china plate with a sound that felt like a bell signaling the start of a fight they were not prepared for. His face went white, not a pale shade of worry, but the translucent white of a man who suddenly realizes he is standing on a trap door. Kevin snapped forward, his earlier judge-like composure replaced by a sudden, jagged twitch in his jaw. No, he barked. No what? I did not look at him. I did not give him the satisfaction of my eye contact. Instead, I looked at Mr. Whitman, the family attorney. He was an old man who had seen 40 years of family wars, but even he looked unsettled by the sudden drop in temperature in the room. Mr. Whitman, I said, my voice steady and punchy, please pull up the public property records for the county. I will read you the addresses. The lawyer hesitated, glancing at my father, then back at me. There was a beat of silence, where the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and my brother's breathing, which had suddenly become very loud. Mr. Whitman turned to his laptop, his fingers starting that soft, rhythmic clack on the keys. I leaned forward, the marble floor beneath my heels feeling solid and cold. I started reading the first address, a duplex in Tampa that I had personally renovated 3 years ago. Mr. Whitman's cursor blinked on the large LED screen mounted on the wall. He typed, he searched, and then the result snapped onto the screen in high definition for the whole room to see. Owner, Teagan Abigail Caldwell, recorded February 18, 2019. My mother gasped, a sharp, ragged sound that cut through the silence. My father's face drained of the last of its color. Kevin forced a laugh, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. That is wrong, he stammered. Pull the actual deed. Whitman clicked again. A scanned quitclaim deed filled the entire wall. There was the recording stamp, there was the notary seal, and there, in black and white, was my grandpa Hank's looping signature. My name was printed directly beneath it. Orlando, I said. I did not wait for them to process the first blow. I just kept the rhythm going. The same outcome appeared on the screen. Miami Beach, the same. I led them through all 11 properties, one by one. Each click of the mouse was like a drum beat that no one could talk over. 11 times the same truth. It was a clinical execution of their expectations. My father whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. You have owned them this whole time? I leaned back, my posture expressing a lethal precision. Since before Grandpa died, I said. He settled the matter while he still could. He also warned me that Kevin was skimming. He told me about the cash rents that never made it to the bank. He told me about the phantom repairs for roof leaks that never existed. He told me to stay quiet, to keep my day job as a consultant, and to document exactly everything. Aunt Vanessa leaned in, her smirk gone, replaced by a greedy curiosity that she could not quite hide. So, you stayed quiet and let Kevin manage everything? I looked at my brother. His eyes were locked on the word owner on the screen as if he could erase it with the sheer force of his panic. He did not manage, I said. He took. I reached into my bag and set a thick, heavy binder on the table. It was the result of 5 years of unglamorous diligence. Forensic accounting, every rent payment, every vacancy, every made-up expense for a contractor who does not exist, total documented theft, $372,680. Kevin lurched to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. You set me up, he screamed. No, I said, my voice like ice. You volunteered. You spent 5 years thinking I was the spare table in this house, the one you could pile your garbage on while you feasted at the head, but I was not the spare. I was the architect of your own prison. My mother reached for my wrist, her touch finally acknowledging my presence now that there was $8 million attached to it. Teagan, please, she said. Family, we are family. I pulled free from her grip, the movement decisive and final. Family had 5 years to notice me, I said. Family had 5 years to ask why I was working 60-hour weeks while my brother was in St. Tropez on my rental income. You chose the golden child. And you chose to keep me in the shadows, but the thing about shadows is that they are the best place to watch from. I slid a sealed envelope across the table to Mr. Whitman, my attorney's complaint, I said. I will be filing it on Monday morning. Kevin stared at the binder as if it were a bomb. The properties are not up for debate. I told the room as I stood up, the ownership is settled. The only thing left to discuss are the consequences of $372,000 in theft. I walked out of that room before anyone could try to rewrite the air. In the lobby, the sound of my heels clicking on the marble felt like a victory declaration. It was calm, factual, and lethal. My phone began to vibrate in my pocket. Kevin, Kevin, Kevin. Each call was a siren of panic. I did not answer a single one. I simply walked out into the Miami sun and went back to my ledger. This was not revenge, it was accounting, and the debt was finally paid. For 5 years, I lived in a house built on silence. People think silence is empty, but they are wrong. Silence is heavy. It is a structure. I am a senior architectural consultant, so I understand how things stand up and how they fall down. I know that if a foundation is cracked, it does not matter how much gold leaf you put on the crown molding. My family was a house with a rotting foundation, and for 60 months, I was the only thing keeping the roof from collapsing on their heads. While Kevin was busy performing the role of a high-powered real estate mogul, I was doing the silent labor that actually kept the 11 properties alive. He did not know a structural load-bearing wall from a decorative partition. He could not tell you the zoning laws for Miami Beach if his life depended on it, but he was very good at one thing, spending. While he was posting photos of crystal flutes and private cabanas in St. Tropez, I was the one meeting contractors at 3 in the morning. To fix a burst main in the Tampa duplex, I was the one filing tax permits and navigating the labyrinth of city ordinances under his name, just to make sure the bank did not move in. My parents, Richard and Karen, looked at my brother and saw a leader. They saw the expensive suits I helped him pick out and the confident stride he used to walk into rooms I had already prepared for him. When they looked at me, they saw a shadow. They saw a quiet girl who was useful for filing papers and staying out of the way. They treated my career like a hobby and Kevin's incompetence like a burden he was bravely carrying for the family. My compassion had become a luxury they overdraft. Every single day, and for a long time, I let the balance go into the red. People often ask why I did not scream earlier. They wonder why I did not take the deeds and run the second I realized what Kevin was doing. They do not understand the invisible chains of a survivor. When you grow up in a house where your value is measured by how much of someone else's mess you can clean up, silence becomes your only true fortress. I was not being weak, I was being a survivalist. In my head, I called it the laboratory of neglect. I stayed because I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I stayed because every time Kevin called me a pathetic assistant, it was another entry in the ledger. Every time my mother told me not to ruin his mood with technical talk, it was another piece of evidence for the forensic audit. I realized that our relationship was not a bond of blood, it was a subscription service where I was footing the bill. I was the silent investor in their collective delusion of a perfect family, but even the most patient architect has a limit. I watched Kevin skim $372,680 from the maintenance funds over 4 years. I watched him trade the safety of our tenants for first-class tickets and ego boosts. That was when I stopped making their Morning coffee, that was when I stopped answering his frantic texts about zoning boards. I stopped being the glue and started being the gravity. I let the silence do its work. I let Kevin get comfortable in his theft. I let him believe that his sweatless virtue had made him a king. I did not need to build a case against him. He was building it himself, brick by brick, lie by lie. I was just the one standing in the shadows, holding the blueprints to his eventual collapse. The port of Miami at twilight is a sea of neon lights and false promises. I stood on the deck of the yacht, a 100-foot monument to my brother's ego, watching the city's elite sip champagne that was paid for with the stolen equity of my inheritance. The air smelled of salt, expensive perfume, and the rotting scent of unearned confidence. Kevin had invited every major real estate investor in Florida to this gala to announce his sole ownership of the Caldwell portfolio. He wanted to cement the lie before I could file my complaint on Monday morning. He did not realize he was not hosting a celebration, he was hosting his own televised deposition. Kevin found me near the stern, far away from the center of attention where he had been holding court. He looked at me with a smirk that felt like a jagged piece of glass. "Teagan, look at this," he said, sweeping his arm toward the crowd. "This is what a leader looks like, this is what ownership looks like." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are lucky I even let you on this boat. You are here to hold my drink, not my hand. You are a pathetic assistant who thinks she is an architect because she can read a blueprint. Stay in the shadows where you belong, or I will make sure you are blacklisted from every firm in this city." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing, no anger, no hurt, not even a spark of the old desire to be understood. My brother was a subscription I had finally cancelled, and I was just waiting for the service to be cut off. I checked my watch. It was exactly 8:45 in the evening. In 15 minutes, he was scheduled to give the keynote speech on the giant LED screen that dominated the middle deck. My mother appeared from the crowd, her face arranged in that fragile mask of social perfection. She looked at me, then at Kevin, and I saw her reflexively adjust his tie as if he were still a toddler. "Teagan," she said, her voice tight with a warning I had heard 1,000 times before, "do not ruin your brother's special night with your jealousy. He has worked so hard for this. Be a good sister and just be happy for once. This is his moment to shine." I watched her, and the realization hit me with the force of a structural failure. This was the trap of cruel normalization. My mother was not blind to Kevin's greed. She had simply decided that his comfort was more important than my reality. Her blindness was a survival mechanism to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. She had spent decades training me to be the load-bearing wall so that Kevin could be the decorative crown molding. She did not want peace, she wanted my silence to continue. Footing the bill for her lie, I took a slow sip of my water. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight, the account was closed. "Enjoy the sunset, Mom," I said, my voice as cold as the deep water beneath the hull. "It is the last one you will ever see from this deck." Kevin laughed, a loud, performative sound meant for the investors nearby. He patted my shoulder with a proprietary arrogance that made my skin crawl. "You hear that? She is finally admitting defeat. That is my girl. Now, get me another drink. I am about to make us another $8.4 million. I watched him walk away toward the stage, his chest puffed out with the illusion of power. He thought the yacht made him big. I knew the ledger made him small. Inside my clutch, my phone was already synced to the yacht's entertainment system. The sunrise I was planning for them was not made of light. It was made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. Kevin took the stage at exactly 9 o'clock, the spotlight catching the artificial gleam of his teeth as he began his pitch to the room full of Miami's power players. He spoke about vision, he spoke about a legacy built on hard work and family values. He spoke as if he had spent a single day in his life understanding the foundation of the $8.4 million empire he was currently trying to auction off to the highest bidder. My father stood in the front row, his chest puffed out with a vicarious pride that I had never been allowed to earn. My mother watched with a smile that was so fixed, so determined to be happy, that it looked like a structural defect. I did not wait for the applause. I reached into my clutch and initiated the override. The giant LED screen behind Kevin, which was supposed to show a glossy rendering of a new luxury development, suddenly flickered. The bright architectural lines vanished, replaced by a harsh, blue light that cast a clinical glow over the entire deck. Then, the first document snapped onto the screen. It was the deed to the Miami Beach penthouse, recording stamp, notary seal, and in the center of the screen, magnified so large that the investors in the back of the boat could read it, was the owner's name, Teagan Abigail Caldwell. Kevin stopped mid-sentence. He turned around, his mouth hanging open, looking at the screen as if it were a ghost. The murmurs from the crowd started as a low hum and quickly rose into a roar of confusion. I did not stop. I tapped my phone again. The Orlando properties appeared, then the Tampa duplex. All 11 deeds scrolled across the screen in a rhythmic, lethal sequence. This was the trap of cruel normalization. I looked at my parents as the crowd began to pull away from them. They were not shocked because they did not know. They were shocked because the public could finally see the lie they had spent 5 years polishing. Their blindness had been a survival mechanism to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. They had allowed Kevin to play the hero because acknowledging my labor would have required them to admit their own favoritism. They had traded my reality for his comfort, and now, the bill was due in front of every person they had ever tried to impress. Kevin lunged for the laptop at the side of the stage, his face contorted with a frantic, jagged panic. "Teagan, turn it off," he screamed, his voice cracking over the sound of the ocean. "It is a mistake. This is all a mistake." I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking on the deck with a finality that silenced the room. "It is not a mistake, Kevin," I said, my voice projected clearly through the microphone I had also hijacked. "It is an audit." I projected the next slide. This was not a deed, it was the forensic accounting report, the screen filled with a spreadsheet that de-romanticized our entire relationship into a series of business transactions. I highlighted the maintenance funds for the last 4 years. The numbers were undeniable. The screen showed exactly where the rent money had gone, $372,680, every St. Tropez hotel bill, every designer suit, every first-class ticket. It was all listed next to the phantom repairs Kevin had claimed were necessary for my properties. Revenge is a word for people who feel too much. This was simply accounting. I looked at the investors, the men and women Kevin had been trying to court moments ago. They were not looking at a mogul anymore. They were looking at a documented thief. Kevin fell back against the screen, the blue light of his own crimes making him look smaller than I had ever seen him, but the kill shot was still coming. I projected the final document, the trap trust. Grandpa Hank was an architect of a different kind. He knew exactly what kind of man his grandson was. The trust he established for the condos had a very specific clause. Kevin could only maintain his management position if he received a biennial signature of managerial competence from me. If I refused to sign, the trust dissolved, and he became personally and legally liable for any financial discrepancies found during his tenure. The room went completely silent, even the waves seemed to stop crashing. Kevin looked at the clause on the screen, then at me. He realized that for 5 years, he had not been in control. He had been walking into a trap that Grandpa Hank and I had set before he even knew the properties were mine. I pulled a single piece of paper from my clutch. The waiver of competence. I held it up so the whole deck could see it. "I am the silent investor in this family, Kevin," I said, "and I am officially withdrawing my capital." I watched the power flip in real time. It was not a slow leak or a gradual shift. It was a total, catastrophic structural failure. The investors, the very men and women Kevin had spent 3 hours trying to court with rented charm, were not just looking away, they were physically backing away. These were high-stakes professionals who dealt in risk assessment, and they knew a toxic asset when they saw one. In under 60 seconds, my brother had gone from a rising real estate mogul to a massive criminal liability. He was no longer the judge at the head of the table, he was a defendant in a room full of 300 witnesses. Kevin's face went through 3 distinct stages of collapse. First came the frantic, bug-eyed denial, then the crushing realization that the deeds on the screen were indisputable, and finally, the naked, ugly panic of a man who has never had to face a single consequence in his entire life. He looked at me, and for the first time in 28 years, he did not see a pathetic assistant. He saw the only person on this yacht who could keep him out of a federal courtroom. He fell to his knees. Right there on the middle deck, the expensive Italian fabric of his suit dragging in a puddle of spilled champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Teagan, please," he stammered, his voice sounding thin and ragged against the wind. "I was just trying to build something for us, for the family. Do not do this to me. Think about what this will do to my life." My mother rushed toward him, her hands trembling as she tried to pull him up from the deck. She looked at me with an expression that was a jagged mix of genuine horror and habitual entitlement. "Teagan, Abigail, stop this at once," she hissed, her social mask finally shattering. "Do not you dare do this to your brother. Think about what you are doing, think about the family name. Your father is 73 years old and his heart is not what it used to be. Do you want him to see his only son in handcuffs over a few properties?" Richard stood beside her, his shoulders slumped and his eyes wet with a desperation he had never felt when I was the one working 60-hour weeks in the shadows to cover their tax failures. "Teagan," he said, his voice a ghost of the authority he used to hold over me. Mercy, have some mercy. We are blood, this is not who we are. I looked at the three of them, and for the first time, the house of my family was completely transparent. I saw the rot in the joists and the cracks in the slab. There was no love here, only a desperate, frantic need to maintain the performance. Blood is a biological fact, Richard, I said. My voice projected clearly through the yacht's speaker system, echoing off the dark water of the harbor. It is not a legal defense, and it is certainly not a currency you get to spend to keep me quiet. For 5 years, I offered you loyalty, diligence, and silence. I was the silent investor in your collective lie, footing the bill while you feasted on my inheritance, but my compassion was a luxury you overdraft until the account was bone dry. You did not want a daughter. You wanted a load-bearing wall you could ignore while you decorated the facade. I held up the waiver of managerial competence, the single sheet of paper that was the only thing standing between Kevin and a prison cell for $372,680 in theft. I saw the flash of hope in his eyes as I lowered my hand toward the podium. He thought the old subscription was still active. He thought I was still sensible. I did not reach for a pen. Instead, I gripped the top edge of the document with both hands. The sound of the paper tearing was remarkably loud in the absolute silence of the port of Miami. I shredded it slowly, methodically, letting the white scraps flutter down like expensive confetti onto my brother's kneeling form. I am not being cruel, Kevin, I said, looking him directly in the eye as the last piece hit the deck. I am just being realistic. You are a phase, not a future, and the Caldwell subscription has officially been cancelled. The sun rose over the Tampa duplex on Saturday morning, casting a clean, horizontal light across the sunburned siding and the hibiscus bushes I had spent my own money to save 3 years ago. I stood on the balcony, watching a toddler draw chalk circles on the driveway below. It was a scene of ordinary life, protected now by unglamorous diligence rather than the brittle performance of a golden child. The $8.4 million portfolio was no longer a theoretical debate, it was a physical reality under my sole control. I sat at my small outdoor table with my laptop and a cup of black coffee. There was no room left for sentimentality or family mercy. My compassion had been a luxury my family overdraft for 22 years, and the account was permanently closed. I moved through the property management software with clinical precision, sending formal termination notices to every one of Kevin's phantom contractors. I replaced them with bonded, professional teams who did not charge for roof leaks that did not exist. I sent new welcome emails to every tenant, introducing them to a landlord who valued structural integrity over St. Tropez hotel suites. As I stared at the numbers on the screen, I realized the truth of the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Kevin had never been strong, he had only ever been as big as the money he was allowed to steal. Without the $372,680 he had funneled into his ego, he was nothing more than a ghost in an Italian suit. He had spent his life having things, but he had never learned how to be anyone. Now that the money was gone, the man had vanished with it. My father shone up at the duplex later that afternoon. He did not try to bargain this time, and he did not bring my mother or her fragile social masks. He just stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building and the daughter he had spent 5 years pretending not to see. He told me he was proud of me. I looked at him and realized that his pride was a transaction. He was finally proud because I was the one holding the deeds. I handed him a copy of the deed packet and the forensic audit. You could have been proud years ago, Dad, I said, my voice as steady as the foundation of the house. The truth was always public records. He stood there trembling, a 73-year-old man facing the reality that he had traded his daughter's loyalty for a son's performance. I accepted his apology, but I did not invite him inside. After he left, I formally changed the locks on every property in the portfolio. I deleted Kevin's contact information and the group texts that had served as my prison for so long. That night, for the first time in 60 months, I slept without guarding my own name. If you've ever had to build your own success in the shadows while someone else took the light, share this story. Let's remind everyone that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes, it's a strategy. Subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.